I'm Emily Carter, 31 years old, and for the past year, I've been quietly paying every major bill in my parents' house mortgage, utilities, groceries, while building my engineering career from a little attic office they barely acknowledge. I thought I was keeping our family afloat, until the day my brother and his wife moved in, and my mother told me, "It might be hard for you to stay here." I didn't argue. I just smiled because they had no idea what I was about to do next. Before I tell you how I turned their plan upside down, drop a comment with where you're watching from and hit like and subscribe if you've ever been pushed aside by the very people you were helping. The living room held the kind of light that makes everything look softer than it really is. Late afternoon gold sliding through lace curtains, dust drifting like slow snow. The wall clock ticked too loudly, every swing of the pendulum cutting the silence into even obedient slices. I stood near the mantel with a chipped mug gone cold in my hand, trying to decide whether to set it down or hold on to it like proof I belonged here. Jason didn't bother to sit. He planted himself between me and the doorway, as if he owned the threshold. From now on, he said, voice flat and managerial, we'll take care of the house by ourselves. You should start looking for another place. My body heard it before my mind did. A clamp tightened around my ribs, a soft, instinctive swallow that tasted like metal. I had imagined 100 small cruelties from this family, but I hadn't pictured this one exiling me from the house I kept from cracking. Somewhere else, I asked, because sometimes you repeat the wound to verify it's real. You mean... Leave Melissa was already leaning against the bookcase like an influencer posing in a showroom, arms folded, perfect ponytail, a smile as narrow as a blade. It's for the best, she said. For everyone. Nancy. My mother didn't look at me. She stayed angled toward the window, fingers pressing at a wrinkle in the curtain that only she could see. The light reached her cheek, but not her eyes. She had perfected that trick years ago, present enough to claim innocence, distant enough to deny responsibility. I kept waiting for her to clear her throat and tell Jason to dial it back, to remind him who paid which bill this month to be the kind of mother you can lean on when the floor tilts. She didn't. I realized my jaw had locked. I made myself unclench it. Is there a reason I said carefully, or just a preference for empty rooms? Jason exhaled like I was being dramatic. It's not. Look, Em, the house has been tense. Mom needs calm routine. You working all hours, all the noise with those? Calls the mess. The mess? I almost laughed. The mug warmed slightly under my palm heat, returning from my skin because none remained in the drink. I pictured the spreadsheet on my laptop upstairs, the automatic transfers, the line items for utilities and groceries, and the credit card my mother doesn't really use, except she does. All the invisible labors that don't make a sound until you cut them off. You think the problem is my keyboard. Melissa's smile didn't change, but her eyes sharpened. We're trying to help. You've been... stuck. She gestured at my sweater, the old one I wear when I'm coding at dawn. Maybe a fresh start would be good. The sweater suddenly felt heavier, like it belonged to someone older than me. It smelled like coffee and WD-40 and the cedar in the closet upstairs. I thought about the mornings when the house was still and my mind wasn't. How the work pulled me forward hour by hour until the sun reached the same angle it sat in now. I thought about invoices that actually cleared the way my father Robert nodded when I showed him the numbers last spring, quiet pride softening the lines around his mouth. He believed me. He saw me. The memory cracked something in my chest. Nancy, I said, because I still can't call her Mom when I need her to be more than a title. Is this what you want? Her hand smoothed the curtain again, the fabric whispering under her palm. We should all do what's best for the house, she said, diplomatic as a voicemail. Jason and Melissa will handle things. Handle. Such a clean verb for such a messy reality. The clock ticked. Somewhere deeper in the house, the refrigerator kicked on with a low hum. The whole place breathed around us like an animal that didn't care who fed it. I became aware of the small weight in my left pocket, cool metal pressed against my thigh. I slid my hand down and felt the teeth of the old key my father gave me the day he decided the roof was finally good enough to stop leaking. The key was iron-heavy for its size, rough in spots where years had smoothed most edges but not all. You'll know when to use it, he'd said, a puzzle tucked inside a blessing. Back then, I'd laughed and looped it on a chain, more charm than tool. Lately, I'd carried it without thinking. Now it sat in my palm like a verdict. You think I'm a burden? I said not to argue, but to test the sentence in the room. Words have a way of ringing true or false depending on the air they travel through. Jason's brows lifted in practiced surprise. Don't put words in our mouths. Melissa tilted her head. You seem tense. That's all we're saying. Tense. As if tension were a character flaw rather than a symptom of being stretched between other people's needs. I scanned the space the photo of us at Pisgah all wind-chapped smiles. The ceramic hen Nancy loves. The basket where mail collects until I sort it because no one else will. In the corner, a tower of moving boxes, Jason had claimed he was preparing for the garage clean-out that never happened. A life full of objects that insist they mean family. It's strange what you notice when someone announces they would like you not to exist in the place where you've been holding everything together. Your senses turn up. The apple cinnamon candle Nancy favors had burned down to a ring of wax sweet and stale. The floorboard under the edge of the rug wobbled a loose nail tapping twice when weight shifted in just the wrong spot. Melissa's perfume notched higher as if scent alone could colonize the room. I'm not asking, Jason added, sensing the conversation slipping sideways. This is what makes sense. You can figure it out. You always do. That last part cut more than the rest. You always do. He was right. I solve problems. But I thought solving them made me part of the solution, not the problem that must be removed. 1,000 small memories blinked like lights on a console the night I drove across town for a part so the heater wouldn't die. The way Nancy's card cleared at the grocery because I moved money a minute earlier. The hospital paperwork I pre-filled just in case. None of that counted now. Or it counted against me. A laugh tried to escape and turned into a cough. It's funny, I said, looking down, because looking up felt like standing on the edge of a cliff. You talk about routine and calm, like the house invented those words. Like these walls raised you. I kept this place breathing. You just didn't hear it. No one answered. The pendulum swung. I felt the familiar urge to apologize for saying the truth out loud. I swallowed it whole. It lodged somewhere behind my sternum and began to burn, the kind of burn that clarifies rather than consumes. In another life, this is where a mother would step in and say, "Wait, let's slow down. Let's talk." In this life, Nancy let the curtain fall and glanced at the clock like we were late for something more important than this. "Pack your things?" Melissa said softly, almost kind. "We'll help with boxes." I nodded because that's what I do when the plan is terrible but inevitable. The key rested against my lifeline, cold and patient. I closed my fingers around it until the teeth printed little crescents in my skin. Pain, but the good kind, the kind you can measure. The room blurred for a second the way it does when you stand up too fast. I put the mug on the mantel, not trusting my hands to keep it from shattering. Every object suddenly had a sound in my head, the scrape of a drawer, the thud of a suitcase, the zip of a tape gun ripping across cardboard. There's an order to leaving even when you didn't plan to go. Outside wind chased a handful of leaves across the porch, their dry bodies skittering like tiny animals. Somewhere down the street, a dog barked twice and then stopped as if reconsidering its complaint. I could feel the first chill of evening moving through the seams of the house, the temperature dropping 1/2 a degree at a time. "I'll be out of your way," I said. My voice surprised me with how steady it sounded. My palms were damp. My cheeks, I realized, were dry. I stepped past Jason. He didn't move aside so much as he let me slip through the space his certainty left. On the bookshelf, our family photo at the county fair leaned a fraction of an inch to the left. I straightened it without thinking and almost laughed at myself. Habit is a kind of gravity. At the door to the hall, I hesitated. Not because I was unsure, because I'd learned that when you cross a line, you can't uncross. It's useful to name it. I looked back at them. The brother who mistakes confidence for care, the sister-in-law who confuses control, with help the mother who folds herself into silence and calls it peace. "Okay," I said. "If this is what's best for the house." No one corrected me. The hall was cooler, the air less perfumed. My footsteps sounded too loud on the hardwood, each one a small announcement. I'm still here for now. Upstairs, the door to the attic room waited paint-nicked near the knob where keys have grazed it for years. I put my hand in my pocket. The old iron key lay there, heavier than it had any right to be a secret I wasn't sure I wanted. When I curled my fingers, it clicked against my ring like a tiny bell. Before I tell you what I did next before the accounts and the boxes and the thing that finally made them hear what they refused to see, I have to tell you how we got to this exact doorway. Because the story didn't start with Jason's sentence. It started long before with a winter train and a room under a slanted roof and the first time that key ever touched my palm. 3 years earlier, the world had been a different kind of cold. Not the passive chill of an autumn afternoon, but the sharp, deliberate winter of Boston wind knifing through the seams of your coat snow, crusting in the folds of your scarf until it melted down your collar. I was standing on the platform at South Station with a one-way ticket and a duffel bag whose zipper had given up somewhere in Vermont years ago. My laptop was wrapped in an old sweatshirt wedged between a pair of boots and a stack of spiral notebooks. Every possession I'd chosen to keep had to fit into one bag and one backpack. The rest I'd left behind in an apartment that would feel emptier without me, though not by much. The PA crackled, announcing the Asheville-bound train's connection through Charlotte. A flock of pigeons startled upward from the far end of the platform. My fingers tightened around the strap of the duffel. Somewhere under my coat, my heart was thudding too fast for the cold to catch it. Leaving Boston wasn't a plan so much as a surrender. I'd spent months in a job that called itself fast-paced and meant it 60-hour weeks at a tech consultancy where daylight existed only as a rumor. I'd kept my head above water by turning parts of myself off appetite, hobbies the belief that burnout wasn't inevitable. Then came the email, just one sentence, polite but irreversible, that my role was being phased out. I'd thought about finding something else in the city, but the rent alone was a dare I didn't feel like taking. Asheville wasn't cheap, but my parents' house had space. At least that's what I told myself on the train. I'd go home, reset, save some money, then leave again when I had a cushion. The ride south was a blur of half-sleep and bad coffee. I watched the landscape thaw by degrees, the snow thinning into patches, the trees trading their ice armor for damp black bark. Somewhere near Richmond, I found myself staring at my reflection in the window, pale eyes ringed in a color between blue and gray hair pulled into a knot that had given up halfway through the trip. I didn't look like someone starting fresh. I looked like someone trying not to unravel in public. By the time I stepped off at Asheville's small station, the air was damp and smelled faintly of pine. My father was there leaning against his old pickup with a paper cup of coffee and the easy half-smile he reserved for arrivals. His hair had gone grayer at the temples since Christmas, but his eyes were the same blue, steady, the kind that read the weather in your face before you said a word. "Long trip," he asked, taking the duffel from me like it weighed nothing. "Long enough," I said, and tried to match his smile. The drive home wound through narrow roads lined with rhododendron and the first stubborn blooms of late winter. Every curve felt half familiar, like a song I'd learned as a kid, but hadn't heard in years. The house was the same, too, 2 stories of weathered wood and a porch that creaked in welcome. Inside it smelled like lemon oil and the faint, comforting must of books. My old room upstairs had been turned into storage, which meant stacks of boxes with labels like Xmas Lights and Taxes 2012. My father offered to clear it out, but I asked for the attic room instead. It was smaller with a slanted ceiling and one window that looked west toward the mountains. The floorboards were uneven, the radiator hissed like a tired cat, and the whole space smelled faintly of cedar from the closet. I set up a folding desk by the window, balanced my laptop on top, and called it an office. That spring, I took on my first freelance job fixing a stubborn mechanical design for a small manufacturing firm out of Ohio. The pay was modest, but it was enough to prove I could make money without commuting, without cubicles, without pretending to be interested in office politics. I followed it with another contract, then another. My work hours slid toward dawn because that's when my brain was clearest. The world outside the attic window shifted from black to deep blue to gold as I typed the mountains catching the first light like they were built for it. In the quiet, I started to remember who I was before I got so good at sprinting for other people's deadlines. I wore sweaters with fraying cuffs, brewed coffee strong enough to make my teeth ache, let my hair dry into its natural waves instead of forcing it into a bun. I talked to clients over video calls where nobody cared what was behind me as long as the work got done. It should have been enough. But downstairs, my mother's unease grew louder than the radiator. She didn't understand how working from home could be anything but code for unemployed. To her, real jobs happened in real offices with time clocks and commutes. No matter how many invoices I showed her, no matter how I pointed to the direct deposits hitting my account, she'd purse her lips and say things like, "I just don't want you to waste your potential." Sometimes she'd hover in the kitchen doorway while I made coffee, asking how long I planned to keep doing this online thing. I'd try to explain the contracts, the engineering problems I solved, the fact that my income was growing every quarter. She'd nod like she was listening, but her eyes would slide away already braced for the day I'd admit it had all been a phase. It was easier with my father. When I showed him my earnings spreadsheet one evening, he whistled low and said, "That's more than I made my first year out of school." He didn't care that I did it in slippers instead of steel-toed boots. He cared that I could stand on my own. The attic room became my anchor dim at night, golden in the morning, smelling of cedar and coffee. I thought naively that if I worked hard enough, the rest of the house would see me the way he did. I didn't know then how quickly that illusion would break. One afternoon, an email landed in my inbox from a firm in Chicago offering a project big enough to double my income for the quarter, the kind of opportunity I'd been waiting for. I left it unread for hours, my cursor hovering over the subject line like it might burn me. Because even then, I could feel the pressure building under the floorboards, small comments, sidelong glances, the way my mother's voice tightened when she asked if I'd ever considered getting out more. I told myself I was imagining it. But the house had its own weather, and the air was shifting. I didn't open the email that day, and in hindsight, I realized that's when the real trouble began. It started small the way mold does, just a shadow in the corner of something you thought was solid. One Thursday morning, I was at the kitchen counter pouring coffee into the travel mug I'd had since college, the one with a dent in the side from falling off a workbench. The sun was spilling across the linoleum, making the steam glow. Nancy leaned against the opposite counter, arms crossed like she was waiting for me to clock in for a shift she hadn't assigned. "People don't make real money just staring at a screen all day," she said like she was opening a polite conversation. I took a slow sip before answering, letting the heat pool behind my teeth. "I'm not just staring. I'm solving problems for companies that pay me to do exactly that." She tilted her head lips, pursing into a little knot. "Contracts can be faked, Emily." "You know that, right?" The words lodged in my ribs. "Why would I fake my own income to live in your attic?" Her gaze slid to the window as if the maple tree outside had just done something worth watching. "I'm just saying, it's not the same as a real job." Real job? 2 words that erased the invoices in my inbox, the CAD files I'd stayed up late refining the calls with project managers in 3 different time zones. I felt the muscles in my jaw pull tight the same way they did when I hit a stubborn bolt that refused to turn. The conversation ended the way they all did, her sipping tea in silence. Me taking my coffee upstairs, the distance between floors more than just 12 steps. A week later, the tension left the kitchen and went public. It was a Saturday BBQ in our backyard the first warm weekend of May. The smell of charcoal clung to the air, mingling with honeysuckle from the fence line. Neighbors wandered in through the open gate, carrying bowls of potato salad and plastic cups of lemonade. I was arranging burger buns on a platter when Aunt Carol, Nancy's older sister, appeared at my elbow. She had the kind of smile that always meant trouble was coming, dressed as advice. "So, Em," she began loud enough for 3 people behind her to hear, "still living at home." "Huh, not getting too comfortable up there in that little attic." I kept my eyes on the buns. "It's temporary." "Oh, I'm sure," she said, patting my arm like I'd confessed something cute. "I just worry you might get stuck." You know how it is. Harder to launch the longer you wait. Nancy laughed softly from the grill, turning a burger like she was turning a page. She works from home, she explained to no one in particular. One of those online things. I felt the heads turn. Really, a neighbor chimed in, like surveys or selling crafts. I set the platter down harder than I meant to the plastic thud, drawing a few more eyes. Engineering contracts, I said. I design and troubleshoot mechanical systems for manufacturing companies. From home. Aunt Carol's smile didn't change, but the tilt of it did. Well, as long as it keeps you busy. Busy. Not productive. Not independent. Just busy. I excused myself to the kitchen under the pretense of checking on the drinks. Inside, the cooler air wrapped around me, smelling faintly of lemon cleaner. My hands shook as I opened the fridge, not because I was angry, though I was, but because I could feel the old reflex rising, explain, prove, justify. I hated that it still came so easily. Later that night, after the guests had gone and the yard was littered with paper plates and bottle caps, I found myself at the attic window. The mountains were just shadows against a darker sky, the air humming with the last of the day's heat. I thought about how quickly perception can solidify in a family. One comment, one smirk, one offhand, still living at home can become the whole story if you let it. I'd been telling myself my work spoke for itself, but I was starting to see the flaw in that logic. The people closest to me weren't listening. Downstairs, the dishwasher clicked on water rushing through its pipes. I imagined the conversations happening without me, the gentle reinforcement of a narrative where I was the dependent one, the almost grown child in the attic, the one who needed a push to get out there. I took the Chicago Project email out of my archive and read it again. The offer was still on the table. I could see my name on a contract that would silence every doubt. And yet, my finger hovered over the reply button and didn't move. Because deep down, I knew their doubts weren't about numbers, and numbers, no matter how high, can't buy belief. The day my father fell was the first truly warm afternoon of spring sun, pouring down so thick it felt like a hand on your back, coaxing you outside whether you wanted to go or not. I'd been in the attic deep in the guts of a stubborn CAD file when I heard the ladder crash. It wasn't a sound you can mistake metal hitting the ground, then the sharper, hollower thud of something soft or someone following. By the time I got to the porch, he was sitting on the grass, one leg stretched awkwardly, his face pale beneath the beard. The old ladder lay on its side like it had been pushed. Dad. I dropped to my knees beside him. What happened? He winced as he shifted his weight. Roof flashing came loose. I thought I could. He sucked in a breath. Just patch it quick. You can't move like that. Stay still. My hands hovered uselessly before I made myself check for blood bones at the wrong angles. My brain cataloged everything. His breaths were even pupils equal. But the way he held his lower back told me enough. Nancy came out the door, wiping her hands on a dish towel, her brow furrowing like she'd caught him doing something foolish on purpose. Robert, what on earth? I'm fine, he said automatically. No, you're not. I turned to her. Call Dr. Hayes. Now. We spent the rest of the day in the urgent care clinic. The place smelled like antiseptic and stale coffee. Its beige walls hung with faded prints of mountain streams. The X-rays showed no fractures, but the doctor was blunt his back and left knee would need rest, maybe physical therapy. No more climbing ladders, no more heavy lifting. On the drive home, the truck was quiet except for the tires humming on the asphalt. I could feel his frustration radiating from the passenger seat, not just at the injury, but at the sudden, unwelcome shape of his future. That night, after Nancy had gone to bed, we sat in the dim kitchen. The only light came from the hood over the stove, throwing a small circle onto the table. He stirred a mug of tea he wasn't drinking. Guess I'll have to retire earlier than planned, he said. The shop's not going to wait around for me to heal. I leaned forward, elbows on the table. We'll figure it out. He shook his head. I've got my pension, but between the mortgage and... Well, you know your mother's spending. He gave a weary half-smile. We'll have to tighten our belts. I thought about the invoices on my desk upstairs, the payments hitting my account every month. My own expenses were minimal. I'd been hoarding most of my earnings. The math lined up quickly in my head. I can help, I said. His eyebrows rose. I'm serious. My income's stable now. I've got more work lined up. He studied me for a long moment, as if recalibrating what he thought he knew. I didn't realize. You've been doing that well? I nodded. Let me show you. Up in the attic, I opened my laptop and pulled up my bank statements. The green numbers glowed under the lamplight. His eyes widened slightly. Damn, he murmured half to himself. That's solid, Em. I told you. I smiled, though my chest was tight. You've supported me more times than I can count. Let me do this for you now. He didn't answer right away. Instead, he reached into the pocket of his work shirt and set something on the desk between us, an old iron key, heavy and cold. Its bow was worn smooth from decades of handling, but the teeth were still sharp. This belonged to my father, he said. It opens the tool shed, but it's more than that. He tapped it once. You'll know when to use it. I picked it up. The weight surprised me. It was denser than it looked, like it carried more than metal inside it. I mean it, I said, curling my fingers around the key. I'll take care of things. His gaze held mine steady and full of something that felt like both pride and worry. Just don't lose yourself doing it. By the next week, I was transferring money into his account every month, enough to cover the utilities, groceries, and a chunk of the mortgage. I set up a separate credit card for Nancy linked to the household account I now monitored. My father cut back where he could. I tried to convince my mother to do the same, but her shopping bags kept arriving. It didn't matter, I told myself. I could handle it. I didn't know then that my help would become invisible, even inconvenient, in the story other people preferred to tell. The first few months after Dad's fall, I told myself we were settling into a rhythm. My transfers were covering the bills, my work was steady, and Dad was getting around better with the cane the physical therapist gave him. If I just kept everything humming, maybe the house would start to feel less like a place I was borrowing and more like a home again. But Nancy had other ideas about what home should mean. It started with small comments while I was at the sink or passing through the hall. Could you sweep the porch more often? The laundry basket's been full all day. You know, Emily, other people manage to keep up with the house and work. I'd explain calmly at first that my work wasn't flexible in the way she imagined, that my mornings were when I handled the most complex engineering problems, and if I lost those hours to vacuuming or scrubbing grout, it would cost me actual money. She'd nod like she understood, then say something like, well, maybe if you moved a little faster. One humid afternoon in July, the conversation tipped over. I was in the attic on a client call when the connection dropped. At first, I thought it was the internet. Then I heard Nancy's voice floating up from the kitchen. I didn't know this was here, she said to herself. I went downstairs and stopped cold. My laptop sat on the kitchen table open, but dark, a ring of water blooming across the keyboard from a glass she'd set down too close. The smell hit me, first metal and ozone, the scent of electronics dying. What happened? My voice came out sharper than I meant. She looked up, startled. Oh, I was just wiping the counters and it slipped. I didn't think it would hurt anything. That's not just anything, I said already, blotting at the keys with a dish towel. That's my work. My income. Her mouth tightened. Maybe if you didn't keep it upstairs all the time, I wouldn't have to go looking for it to dust around. I stared at her. You went into my office while I was on a call. It's not an office, Emily, it's the attic. And this is our house. The words clanged in my head. Our house, but somehow her rules. I managed to save the hard drive, but the repair bill wiped out half of what I'd made that week. I set up the replacement machine with a quiet fury, moving it to a corner where the sunlight wouldn't glare on the screen, and no one could accidentally spill anything on it. Dad noticed, of course. He was sitting in his recliner with the sports section when I came down for coffee the next morning. Everything okay up there? He asked. Just keeping my tools where they're safe, I said. He gave me a knowing look, but didn't push. The tension with Nancy didn't ease. If anything, she doubled down, timing her comments for when Dad wasn't in the room, phrasing them just sweetly enough to make me sound defensive if I pushed back. One evening in late August, I was washing dishes when I heard the low rumble of a pickup truck pulling into the driveway, tires crunching over gravel. Headlights swept across the kitchen wall. Nancy's face lit up in a way I hadn't seen in months. She dried her hands on a towel and headed for the door. A moment later, Jason's voice boomed from the porch. Hey, Ma! I froze, soap suds sliding down my wrist. Jason wasn't due for a visit, and if he was here, Melissa wouldn't be far behind. Through the window, I saw them unload bags from the back of the truck, suitcases, boxes, even a set of matching decorative pillows Melissa cradled like they were heirlooms. Nancy ushered them in like she'd been waiting all summer. "You're just in time for dinner," she said, beaming. Jason grinned at me over the pile of luggage. "Looks like we're moving in for a bit, Em." For a second, I couldn't find my voice. Moving in. "Yeah," Melissa said, stepping past me toward the stairs. "We thought we'd help out while Dad's still in the hospital. You know, take some of the weight off your shoulders." Her tone was sugar, but her eyes were something else entirely. Cliffhanger Mem Quoy Part 5. I stood there, dish towel still in my hand, watching the two of them carry their lives into the house like they owned it. Somewhere deep in my pocket, the old iron key pressed against my palm, heavier than I remembered. By the second morning, the house already felt different. Not just louder, though Melissa had a way of walking in heels that turned the hardwood into a drum line, but rearranged like the gravity had shifted. Jason's boots appeared by the front door where I usually kept my work bag. Melissa's handbags, plural, sat on the hallway table, spilling silk scarves over the edge. Even the air smelled different, her perfume sweet and sharp, clinging to the curtains. I came downstairs early, hoping to get coffee before anyone else was up. But Melissa was already in the kitchen, scrolling on her phone with one hand and stirring a pot with the other. "Morning," I said, reaching for the coffee tin. She didn't look up. "Could you hand me the salt? I passed it over?" "What are you making breakfast?" she said like it was obvious. "Jason likes a hot breakfast. Eggs, bacon, pancakes, the works." She glanced at me, then her smile tight. "You can help if you want. I've got work in 20 minutes. "That's fine. We'll eat without you." The coffee tasted bitterer than usual. It didn't take long for my office in the attic to become a hallway. Jason would thump up the stairs without knocking, looking for tools, or the charger he swore I borrowed. Melissa used my desk chair to do her makeup in good light when I was on calls, leaving a faint shimmer of powder across the armrests. One afternoon, I came up from a meeting to find my files pushed to one side of the desk and her curling iron plugged into my outlet. "Melissa?" I said, trying to keep my voice even. "I need this space for work." She glanced at me in the mirror, hair halfway wrapped around the barrel. "You're not using it right now. That's not the point." She shrugged, eyes back on her reflection. "You're a morning person. I'm an afternoon person. We can share." Jason's invasions were more subtle, but just as grating. He'd borrow my car without asking, returning it with the gas light on and a new layer of dust on the dash. When I pointed it out, he'd grin like it was a joke. One night, I caught him in the pantry moving my groceries to the bottom shelf. "Just making room," he said. "For what family stuff? The top shelves should be for everyone." "They already are," I said, closing the pantry door. It wasn't just the space they took. It was the way they filled it with a constant hum of judgment. At dinner one evening, Melissa prodded her fork into the salad I'd made. "Do you always buy this kind of lettuce? Jason likes romaine better." "I like a lot of things," Jason added, "but we can't all get what we want." I set my fork down. "Then maybe you can buy the groceries next time." Silence fell for a beat too long. Then Melissa smiled, not warm, but triumphant. "We will. We're here to help remember." By the end of the week, I'd started locking the attic door when I left the house. It felt petty, but every time I heard Melissa's heels on the stairs or Jason's boots in the hall, I thought of the laptop incident, the pantry shuffle the curling iron on my desk. One evening after they'd gone to bed, I sat at my desk staring at the old iron key in my palm. My father's voice echoed in my head. "You'll know when to use it." I wasn't sure what he meant, but I was starting to think I might find out sooner than I expected. Cliffhanger Mimquoy, Part 6. From downstairs came the muffled sound of Melissa's laugh, light practiced, and just loud enough to remind me I wasn't the only one awake. The first real blow-up came over breakfast. I'd been up since 5, deep into a design review for the Chicago project, the one I still hadn't said yes to. The house was silent, except for the hum of my laptop fan and the occasional creak of the attic beams. Morning was my sanctuary. No interruptions, no small talk, just me and the work. That ended with a fist on my door. "Emily." "Are you up?" Melissa's voice was bright, but there was an edge to it like she already knew the answer. I closed my eyes. "Yes, I'm working." "Well, can you come down and make breakfast? Jason's hungry." I glanced at the clock. It's barely 7. "So, we're all family here. We should start the day together." In the kitchen, Jason was pouring orange juice like a man being served. "Morning," he said, as if nothing about this was unusual. Melissa gestured to the counter. "We were thinking pancakes, eggs, bacon. Maybe fruit salad if we have time." "I've got 30 minutes before my next call," I said, opening the fridge. "You're fast," Jason said, smirking. "I made scrambled eggs toast a quick salad sausage instead of bacon because that's what we had." I set the plates on the table. Melissa tilted her head. "Is this it? You can make more if you want," I said, already turning back toward the stairs. Jason's voice followed me. "What's with the attitude? We're just asking for breakfast." "What's with the entitlement?" I shot back. "You have two hands." Melissa let out a small gasp, the kind you make when someone forgets their lines in a play. "Wow. Rude." The next clash was about my car. I'd parked it in the driveway so I could load it with boxes for a delivery run, parts I was sending to a client. When I went out after lunch, it was gone. Jason came back an hour later, a bag of takeout in his hand. "You took my car," I said. "Borrowed," he corrected. "You weren't using it. I was about to." He shrugged. "Should have told me. And you should have asked." He smirked again, like the whole exchange was a game he'd already won. Even Nancy started to weigh in, always in Jason's favor. One evening, I mentioned lightly that the pantry felt crowded since my groceries kept getting moved. "They're just trying to make it work for everyone," she said. "You've been here a long time, Emily. It's nice to have fresh energy in the house." Fresh energy. As if I'd been stale air all along. That night, back in the attic, I saw the Chicago project email again, third reminder from the client this time, with a gentle note. "We'd love to have you on board, but we need an answer by Friday." It was Tuesday. I stared at the screen, imagining the relief of saying yes, the contract, the work, the pay, that would make me untouchable in every argument about real jobs. But I also imagined the pushback, Melissa complaining, "I was always upstairs," Jason hinting I wasn't pulling my weight, Nancy sighing about how detached I'd become. The cursor blinked like a pulse. My fingers hovered over the keyboard. From downstairs came the sound of Jason's laugh, loud and unbothered, followed by Melissa's voice drifting up the stairs. "We'll have to talk to her about it, about what I didn't know." But I felt the weight of the iron key in my pocket cool and certain against my palm. Cliffhanger Mem Quoy Part 7. On Friday, before I could decide on the Chicago project, Dad's name lit up my phone. The hospital caller ID flashed under it. The hospital smelled like every hospital I've ever been, in bleach-overcooked vegetables from the cafeteria and something metallic underneath. The fluorescent lights pressed down from above, making the white walls feel closer than they were. Dad was propped up in bed, TV remote in one hand, the heart monitor beside him, ticking a slow, steady rhythm. He looked smaller somehow, the edges of him softened by the thin gown and the way the blankets swallowed his frame. He said, a tired smile spreading. "You didn't have to rush over." "I wanted to." I pulled the chair close to the bed. "They said you had some pain again." He nodded. "Back's not healing like they hoped. They might keep me a bit longer." I hesitated, watching his fingers fidget with the blanket hem. "How are you?" "Really?" His eyes shifted to mine, and for a moment the years peeled back to when I was a kid, and he'd tell me the truth, even if it hurt. "I'm worried about you. Me, you, and your mom. Jason." Melissa. "You're not happy there." I looked down at my hands. "I can handle it." "You shouldn't have to handle your own home," he said gently. "If it's not working, leave. You've built your own life. You don't need their permission to live it." The words hit harder than I expected. I reached into my pocket and felt the iron key, its weight familiar now. He saw the movement and smiled faintly. "You'll know when to use it." When I got back that evening, the living room was already charged like a storm waiting to break. Jason was pacing Melissa, sitting with her arms folded, Nancy in the armchair, angled toward them. "There she is," Jason said, turning on me. "We need to talk." I set my bag down slowly. About how this house has been tense, more than tense, since you came back." Melissa chimed in, her tone sugary. "We're all walking on eggshells, Emily. It's not healthy." Nancy's eyes flicked to me, unreadable. "It's true. This isn't working." I felt the floor tilt under me. "Are you saying this is all my fault?" Jason shrugged. "You're suffocating the house. We need space." Calm. I laughed, short, sharp, involuntary. Suffocating Jason, this house is breathing because of me. The bills, the groceries, the mortgage Melissa cut in. You make everything about money, because without it, nothing else works, I shot back. And I've been the one keeping it flowing while you two, I gestured at them, play house in a place you don't even own. Jason stepped closer. Watch your tone. Nancy stood then, smoothing the front of her blouse. Enough. We've decided it's time you found somewhere else. The words landed like the first drop of rain before a downpour. I could have yelled, could have listed every bill I'd paid, every crisis I'd covered without thanks. Instead, I looked at each of them one by one and felt something settle inside me. Okay, I said quietly, if that's what's best for the house. Jason blinked, caught off guard by how quickly I agreed. Melissa tilted her head. You're taking this well. I'm just thinking about my next move, I said. And in my pocket, the iron key pressed harder against my palm, as if it already knew. Upstairs, I shut the attic door and locked it. The laptop hummed to life, and my fingers hovered over the trackpad, not to check my email, but to log into the household bank accounts. The moment the attic door clicked shut behind me, the noise of the house faded. It was just the hum of my laptop and the faint whir of the ceiling fan as I logged into the accounts I'd been managing for over a year. Every line item stared back like a secret I'd been carrying: a loan mortgage payment, my transfer, utility bills, my transfer, grocery charges on the card. Nancy used my transfer. They wanted me gone. Fine. I'd leave them exactly what they thought they had, without me nothing. One by one, I shifted the funds into an account only I controlled. The only money I left untouched was Dad's separate medical fund, off limits no matter what. When the last transfer confirmation appeared on the screen, a strange calm washed over me. I powered down the laptop, opened the desk drawer, and took out the old iron key. Its weight felt different now, less like a question, more like an answer. I slipped it into the side pocket of my duffel bag. Packing didn't take long. Years of living in borrowed space had taught me not to spread out too much. 2 suitcases, my laptop bag, a cardboard box of tools and parts for current projects. I folded clothes with mechanical precision, tucking them between layers of bubble wrap for the more fragile gear. Halfway through, there was a knock on the door. Jason's voice. You need a hand with boxes, no, I said without looking up. Melissa chimed in from the hall. We've got some extras in the garage if you need them. I'm fine. Their footsteps retreated and I went back to work. The next morning, I carried the first suitcase down the stairs. Nancy was in the kitchen with a mug of coffee, Jason at the counter scrolling his phone, Melissa perched on a stool. So it's official, Jason said, watching me. Looks like it. I set the suitcase by the door. Melissa's smile was small but victorious. You're finally leaving. Nancy took a sip of coffee. I hope you find a place that makes you happy. I met her gaze. I already have. Jason leaned back in his chair. Don't come running back when it doesn't work out. I almost laughed. I won't. Outside, the air was cool and clean, the kind of morning that makes you want to drive with the windows down. I loaded the last of my things into the trunk and closed it with a soft thud. Before I got in the car, I looked back at the house. The porch boards I'd repaired last summer. The gutters I'd cleared in the rain. The front door where my mother had stood 100 times to greet other people but never me. I didn't wave. That night, in my new apartment, a small but bright space above a bookstore downtown, I set the iron key on the windowsill. The city noise outside was unfamiliar but oddly comforting. Car engines, voices, the low bass of music from a bar down the block. I made tea, opened my laptop, and finally replied to the Chicago Project email. Yes, let's get started. 2 weeks later, my phone lit up with Jason's name. I almost let it go to voicemail. Almost. The phone buzzed across my desk, Jason's name glowing on the screen. For a full 3 rings, I watched it instead of answering the steam from my tea curling in front of my face. On the 4th, I swiped to accept. Emily. His voice was tighter than I'd ever heard it. We need your help. I leaned back in my chair. What kind of help? There was a pause. Money. The utilities are behind Mom's credit card keeps getting declined and, well, Melissa left. I stared out the window at the street below where a couple was laughing over lattes in the cafe patio. That's rough, I said evenly. You don't understand, he pushed. We didn't know you were paying for everything before. Mom said. She said I was a problem I cut in, not a provider. That's not. He stopped. Okay, maybe she exaggerated. But we can't do this without you. Yes, you can, I said. You're both healthy. You can work. Figure it out. Jason's voice cracked into pleading. Please. Just until no. My tone was calm, almost gentle. I told you before I left. I'm done. There was silence on the line except for the faint sound of him breathing. I hope you prove me wrong, I added. For your sake. Then I hung up. The calls came from Nancy next, but I let them ring. Dad told me later she was working part-time at a craft store, Jason picking up shifts at a warehouse. They were behind on the mortgage. The porch I'd repaired was starting to sag again. Melissa never came back. Meanwhile, my own days fell into a rhythm I hadn't realized I was starving for. Morning coffee on the balcony, the hum of the bookstore below my laptop opened to designs that challenged me in ways house drama never could. Some evenings I drove east to Wilmington to see Dad. His new place was small, but the windows opened wide to catch the ocean breeze, and he kept a jar of tea bags by the stove just for me. We'd sit on his porch with the sound of the waves in the distance, talking about everything and nothing. One Friday, I brought the iron key with me. I set it on the porch railing between us. He picked it up, turned it over in his palm. You figured it out, didn't you? I smiled. It wasn't about the shed. No, he agreed, setting it back down. It was about knowing when to lock something up and when to walk away. Back home that night, I hung the key on a small hook beside my window. The late sun caught its worn edges, throwing a crooked shadow across the wall. It no longer felt like a burden or a mystery, just a reminder. I made tea, opened my laptop, and checked the progress on the Chicago project. Another email waited, this one from a client in Seattle, offering something bigger. I smiled, fingers already moving to type. If they never respected you, why stay? Tell me, have you ever had to walk away from people who claimed they were family? Share your story. Someone out there might need to hear it.